Greetings. Happy Monday. Welcome to the Steve Deace Show here live and on demand on Blaze TV, radio, and podcast with Todd Erzin and Aaron McIntyre. I am Steve Deace. We are brought to you by our friends over at Preborn. You've heard a lot about saving babies on this show, and it's because it's important to me, both personally, philosophically. But let me just be frank with you. We need to save them. And that's why we've partnered with Preborn here at The Blaze. It's the nation's leader in introducing mothers with unplanned pregnancies to their babies. And once she hears that heartbeat and sees that precious life growing inside of her, she is twice as likely to choose life. Now, that is a miracle. But quite honestly, if we don't do this, who will? I mean, the current so-called pro-life movement may not even be able to get 40% of the vote, 41% of the vote in Ron DeSantis' Florida. So while the left fights to take their lives, Preborn's network of clinics fights to save them. And to date, they've rescued over 300,000 babies. And that's not all. They provide love, support, and counseling for up to 2 years for the mama for free as well. But none of this stuff actually is free. But it's not as expensive as you think. An ultrasound is just $28. $140 helps to rescue up to 5 babies. So the baby murder hasn't stopped, so we cannot. So together, between the Blaze and Preborn, we have saved, we estimate about tens of thousands of lives. Let's save even more. Just dial pound 250 on your cell and say the keyword baby. Pound 250 on your cell, say the keyword baby, or go to preborn.com/Steve. That's preborn.com/Steve. All right. We have quite a bit happening on today's show. Our good friend Bob Vander Plaats is going to join us, and we're going to talk about what he suggests pastors around the country should maybe consider preaching next Sunday in advance of the election. So we'll get to that. Next hour, we are going to lay out, we're going to devote an entire segment to this, and I'm going to lay out why I think the Trump-Rogan interview on Friday maybe a Kennedy-Nixon level event in terms of the paradigm shift. So we'll talk about that next hour. Also, we're going to get an update from Michael Cassidy. Some of you might remember him. Last Christmas, he came to our Iowa legislature and became a national name because they put up a satanic display in the legislature, and we were told that this is a blessing of liberty. And Michael tore down the high place in our Capitol because some heroes don't wear capes. And we thought his case was kind of resolved, but now it appears they want to make an example out of him. So we're going to talk to him about that coming up here in the final segment of the program. But before we get to all of that, let's get it started as we always do with Aaron's rundown of what happened while we were away.
What happened while we were away, brought to you by 8 Days. 8 days until election 2024, and for the second straight weekend, Donald Trump has sucked the oxygen out of the American zeitgeist. Of course, last weekend it was that shift at a Pennsylvania McDonald's, serving orders through the drive-through window. This weekend it started on Friday night with his 3-hour marathon interview on the largest platform in Western civilization, the Joe Rogan Experience.
I always got more publicity than other people, and it wasn't like I was trying. In fact, I don't know exactly why. Maybe you can tell me why.
Oh, I could definitely tell you. You said a lot of wild
Maybe.
You said a lot of wild and then CNN, in all their brilliance, by highlighting your wild made you much more popular.
Yeah.
And they boosted you in the polls because people were tired of someone talking in this bullshit, pre-prepared politician lingo. And even if they didn't agree with you, they at least knew whoever that guy is, that's him. That's really him.
To give you an idea of how impactful that appearance on Joe Rogan was for Donald Trump, here's this from Damon Imani. These are the top 4 most viewed videos, at least on Joe Rogan's YouTube account, of all time. Number 1 was that Bob Lazar interview, 61 million views, that was posted 5 years ago. Number 2 was Edward Snowden with 38 million views, also posted 5 years ago. Number 3, Elon Musk, 34 million views, posted 4 years ago. And number 4, Donald Trump with 27 million views, just posted a day ago. Of course, that number now is up to 33 million views as of this morning and does not count audio downloads. Then on Sunday, Trump hosted a jam-packed rally at Madison Square Garden in New York City, including a surprise appearance from TV's Dr. Phil McGraw.
If your neighbor wants to vote the other way, say fine, go vote the other way. I'll love you anyway. Let's lead by example. If they want to do it, let them do it. Love them anyway. But as for you, the collective you, I don't want you to just listen and say, nice talk, Dr. Phil. I want you to march in your life. I want you to march with your beliefs. I want you to not be intimidated.
In completely unrelated news, not only is the joy gone from the Kamala campaign, the demonic seething is back, baby. Here's Tim Walz calling half of America Nazis.
Donald Trump has descended into madness over the last few weeks. And I think some of you don't miss on this. Go do your Google on this. Donald Trump's got this big rally going at Madison Square Garden. There's a direct parallel to a big rally that happened in the mid-1930s at Madison Square Garden. And don't think that he doesn't know for 1 second exactly what they're doing there.
Kamala held a big dollar rally in Houston over the weekend and made it sound like uber popular recording artist Beyonce was going to perform. She didn't. She just spoke for a few minutes, and that made Kamala stands very angry.
Is banned from the moment of conception. You know what? Just send them to that small rally down the street.
Outside that rally in Houston, a Kamala supporter was seen getting in the face of a toddler and screaming at the toddler before the girl's dad pulled her away. It's unclear what precipitated that episode. I'm also not sure what context it's okay to scream at a toddler in public. Tim Walz's wife, Gwen, talked to Katie Couric about tampons in boys' bathrooms in public schools.
You know, if kids are hungry in school, what that does to brain and learning, you're not going to learn to read. So if you're talking about learning to read and closing gaps, then you better take away the barriers for that. If that's tampons, then that's tampons.
In other news, Chinese hackers engaged in a broad espionage operation targeted at cell phones used by Donald Trump and his running mate J.D. Vance and people associated with the Democratic campaign of Kamala Harris. According to various media outlets like Washington Post and Associated Press, citing unnamed officials, it's not immediately clear what data, if any, may have been accessed. U.S. officials are continuing to investigate. And finally, if Donald Trump is elected in 8 days or 9 or 10 or 11, but if we see another Trump administration come January of 2025 and you're looking for reasons to be optimistic, this time isn't going to be like the last time in terms of staffing a Trump administration. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. says he's confident things will be different this time. Here he is speaking over the weekend.
I've talked to Donald Trump specifically about this, and he said to me, I said, look, the last time you were in there, you put John Bolton in charge of NSA and Mike Pompeo in charge of the CIA and the State Department, and you put an oil guy, in charge of Department of Interior, a coal guy in charge of EPA, and a telecom lobbyist in charge of FCC, and pharma lobbyist as head of HHS and FDA, Scott Gottlieb. And he said, here's the difference. He said, when I got in last time, I had no idea how to govern. And I got surrounded by donors and corporate people who said, you appoint this guy and appoint that guy. And he said, I appointed a lot of bad people. Now, I was listening this morning to this extraordinary interview that Donald Trump did with Joe Rogan yesterday. And he said during that interview, he talked specifically about John Bolton. He said, a donor got me to appoint him. And he said, he's a great guy. He turned out, and this is what he said. He said, he's a really bad guy. And he said, this time, I'm not going to do that. He told us that. And what he did, he didn't just promise that, but he did something no other president's done before. Normally, the transition team is not created until November 6th because GAO, the General Accounting Office, pays for all the costs of the transition team. Trump said, I'm not going to do it this time. I'm not going to do it their way. I'm going to start my own transition team 3 months early. And he got private donors. He got private donors to fund it. And he's appointed 20 people, including me in Tulsi. And, there's people of all different kinds of ideology and people who we're going to have to go up against on that transition team and fight for our vision. But I can tell you this, which is unique. There are no corporate lobbyists on that campaign, on that transition team. And usually it's 100% corporate lobbyists. So it's very, very different, and it gives me lots of hope that this government is going to be different than any government we've ever seen.
And that's what happened while we were away.
Aaron's Montage brought to you by our friends right here at The Blaze. Make sure you join us for our election night coverage. We are bringing in pretty much everybody, including yours truly, to help anchor that on election night. And if you want to make sure you're a subscriber to Blaze TV so you don't miss any of it, we are offering our biggest discount right now. $40 off an annual subscription to The Blaze when you go to blazeelection.com/Deace. Don't miss it. blazeelection.com/Deace. We'll either all be rejoicing together, or it'll be like 2022 and I'll be almost fired, and Whitlock and Michael, is it Malice? Is that the guy's name? I can't remember.
I think so.
No insult. I couldn't remember his last name. We'll nearly get into a fist fight, so blazeelection.com/Deace. It'll be interesting nevertheless. And you'll get $40 off if you subscribe now at blazeelection.com/Deace. I want us to talk, not that there aren't other things in that montage that are worthy of discussing. And we're already going to earmark an entire block of time to discuss the Rogan interview. But the worldview difference that Aaron, you highlighted there, we're now just going to openly run on tampons for boys in schools. And the literally Hitler stuff is not just a media meme, it's a campaign plank. That stuff is omnipresent, sadly, in our body politic, meaning that there'll be other entry points, inflection points by which we can make some broad worldview conversation happen from these sorts of differences between the two sides tomorrow and the day after that, and the day after that and the day after that, right? Okay. I want to talk about something that was at the end of your montage, Aaron, and when I saw it today, blew me away. Number one, because I had no idea. And there's not a lot that happens in politics when you do what I do for a living and you just develop the friends and relationships that go along with it. That, other than organic events, things that are like plotted out. I mean, there's not a lot that are plotted out at a meta level that I had no idea of. And this was one of them. It also indicates a massive paradigm shift. In one way, but not in another. But also indicates, if this is successful, how the American right will conduct its business moving forward. And it also makes, it brings more context to the Project 2025 stuff. And this summer, I even defended Trump on that a little bit, even though some of the people that put that together, I would be more aligned with traditionally than, native MAGA from a coalition standpoint. But I understand you cannot that you cannot get ahead of the candidate, right? You can't have people going out there and cutting deals and things of that nature on their own ahead of the candidate, right? We had those discussions about that this summer. I didn't understand why they kept bringing it up, and I understand you're getting attacked by the left on that, but, if you respond all the time to everything they attack you on, well, even if your counter is good, whose narrative is being discussed, yours or theirs?
Theirs.
And how often do you win on defense in politics? Never is the answer. You never win on defense. Being defensive never wins. After hearing this from RFK Jr. over the week, though, I understand a little bit more, because if this has been in the works for 3 months, then we're back to where? Last summer. And I can see now why the former president had a bee in his bonnet about this, even beyond getting outside the lines and then being attacked on it. But this is a massive paradigm shift. It also indicates that we are in a post-ideological political paradigm on the right. Now, for those of us who are ideologues, and I am one, where would we direct an outsider president who's got hundreds of thousands of positions to fill within the federal government? Name, what are the 5 or 6 entities where we would direct him to say, these people have connections, you can trust them. You know, they can step in and be an apparatus apart from the traditional party swamp insider structure. You see what I'm saying? Yeah. I mean, he's not even a governor like Reagan was. I mean, there was a way different tone in Reagan's first term to second because he brought all the California people in with him from his first term. And then in the second term, a lot of those people went home. And they're replaced by the Howard Bakers and Jim Bakers of the world. And it was a much more bushy second term. He doesn't even bring that to the table, not even as a former president, because if you look at the connections of who was hired before, I mean, it was great hires and terrible hires, but it was kind of a menagerie. It was very, very random. Okay? So before all my fellow right-wing ideologues complain that career Democrats like Tulsi Gabbard and RFK Jr. are having a say in who the transition team would be, give me the names of... Hell, we've got 5 or 6 senators, guys. We did a ranking of senators earlier this year. There's 100 of those, right? Didn't we rank John Fetterman 12th?
Yes.
We rated John Fetterman the 12th best senator. So we don't even, you couldn't even like raid the staffs of like the entire Republican Senate caucus. We're not even, I don't even know, I can't sit here and tell you how many of these abortion amendments we're going to defeat around the country. We had very few states that were willing to put things in place to prevent another scamdemic shutdown from happening after the fact. I mean, do you see where I'm going? Tell me where the infrastructure lies. If you're going to go outside, because we all agree we hate the traditional Republican Party apparatus, right? We all agree on that. Right? If you're a left of center populist like RFK and Tulsi, or a right of center populist, you know, like what Trump represents, okay? Or if you're hard libertarian, if you're a Christian conservative, if you're a full spectrum Reagan conservative, if you're an Art Lather, Milton Friedman economic conservative, right? All these various entities within the tent here, or the TARP as I like to call it, don't agree on much. We all agree we hate the mainstream Republican apparatus, though. We kind of all agree on that, right? Okay. Yeah. So if we all agree that we want to go outside of that then to staff a Trump 2.0, okay, we all agree that's where we don't want to go and do that, okay? And Trump had too many of that. I mean, we sat here and watched like Rex Tillerson and Reince Priebus and these people, Elaine Chao, Mitch McConnell's wife at the time, and we're like, what are you doing here, right? All right. So if we don't want that, cool. Where would we direct him instead? Yeah. Where is the movement, generational movement infrastructure, all the conferences we've had, all the books we've sold, yes. Okay? Here's, this morning I saw Larry Sabato at the University of Virginia.
Yeah.
Who used to be like the chief political analyst on Fox News for like more than a decade. At the University of Virginia, the unbiased political analyst accused Trump of holding a Nazi rally at Madison Square Garden yesterday. That's our infrastructure, guys. That's our infrastructure. A pro-life movement that Trump gave them what they asked for and then has done what with it after he gave it to them? What have they done with it? Lose everywhere. Lose absolutely everywhere. So where then, for those of us who are ideologically driven, I mean, if you listen to the Rogan interview, Trump is like, I like RFK Jr. on a couple things, but on a couple other things, not going to listen to that guy at all. Just flat out said that.
Yeah.
Just flat out said it. Okay. Now, like on oil, he even looked at Rogan and says, we need that liquid gold, baby. You know what I'm saying? That was literally what he said. Okay. Tell me then, where is this ideological movement? I mean, we've got people. How many jobs can Chip Roy do? How many jobs can Rand Paul do? How many jobs can Mark Levin do? See what I'm saying? There's hundreds of thousands of jobs in the executive branch. So where's this movement at that would fill it, that has been just lying dormant and waiting for decades for its moment? So where is this movement that Donald Trump has betrayed by going to more of a kitchen cabinet of common sense ideas? Where is it? Show me where it is. I'll wait. Anybody have any suggestions?
It's the same. It's the same place it was in 2016 when Trump arrived on the scene and kicked everybody's ass in the first place. You know, it was that funeral happened a long time ago.
Our
man.
bluff has been called,
Yes.
and there's still a lot of people that still want to believe the BS that we fed them for many years. But our bluff has been called. We don't have anything. We have numbers. So you can't just run us over. But where's the infrastructure that would staff these things that would actually govern? I go back to this. Ron DeSantis had to call a special session to get rid of the wimpy redistricting map from his own legislature. Otherwise, you don't even have the wimpy GOP majority in the House you have now if he doesn't do that. That's the Republican Party, folks. That's much of the conservative movement. And I say this as someone who got into this as a believer in it and worked, and I viewed myself as someone that would, be one of those that inherits the next generation of it. And then I find out there's no movement here. There isn't. So I wanted to address that first and foremost. We have a seat at the table now, but we don't dominate the table. We don't have the infrastructure. Decades of no results indicate this. So the analogy that I have used for the last few months of this election, we're basically talking about New York City of the 80s and 90s versus Minneapolis and San Francisco of 2024. That is exactly what Trump's transition team looks like. How did we used to describe Trump originally? Kind of a patriotic narcissist, right? Okay. Mm-hmm. So if you're a patriotic narcissist, and yet the first time in 2016, you thought, because you read all the same stuff everybody else did, you watched all the same channels everybody else did, so you thought there was this massive conservative infrastructure, right-wing infrastructure out there that you had to tap into and abide by, okay? And you gave them what they said they wanted from you, and then you watched them lose everything with it. Lose it all. Do nothing with it. And you're getting another crack at this? And you're 78, and you have to win or you're going to Rikers Island. It's White House or Rikers Island for Donald Trump. Not to mention, almost all of your former business associations that were lucrative for you and your family are all dissolved and off limits to you now. So now you need to pass on a legacy, an empire to your own family, because they're gonna take this over after you're done, right? So you've got to win this thing. And then you've got to be good at something when you get in there. Who are you going to turn to? The conservative movement? What even is that? What even is that?
You've been asking that your entire career.
What even is that? I have one of the largest platformed pro-life shows in America, never been invited to the mainstream pro-life speaker circuit. Why? Because I actually want to end abortion. That's why. And a lot of other people that do those things do too, but I will actually confront the people that won't let us do it.
Trump thought the conservative movement was Mike Pence, and look how that turned out.
Correct. What's the longest ongoing running gag joke on this show even before you guys came to work here? What will occur before I go where?
CPAC.
CPAC. Is there another show as large of a platform as this that's never spoken there? No. So I'm already dubious. See, we're kind of back now to, Todd, why you and I were this close to taking Trump's offer in the summer of 2015. Why, dude, we've talked about how close it was. I went to that family leadership summit that Saturday. I left we were doing a nationally syndicated show from that event. Yeah. I left our set live on the show and had you and Rebecca take my place because I was fully expecting to go back in the green room and sign on to Team Trump. Everything we're talking about, and it's funny too now, I'm seeing these long-form interviews where you're seeing a way more knowledgeable, the command of issues Trump displayed. Have we seen like any of that for like the last 7 years? Dude like knew intimate details of the environmentalist movement, for goodness sakes. He's breaking down windmill farm technology. Yeah. Where was this? I'll tell you where it was. I talked to that guy for 2 years. I saw that. And so between his knowledge of the issues and the fact that I had already lost faith in much of what became known as the conservative movement, I was anxious for something different, is why I was this close until he wet his pants at that event. But that's how we got to that point. And it's funny now, I feel like I've come full circle now, and I feel like I'm back in the summer of 2015. There is no conservative movement. There really hasn't been. There's an industry. We could not run this thing, even if he said you can have every seat at the table. I don't even know. I don't know. I'm as connected as a lot of people in this business are. I work at presidential politics in the First of the Nation caucus state. I've done this full time for 18 years. If there were 20 seats at the table, I don't know that I could come up with 20 people that I would tell Donald Trump to put in there. In terms of actually being able to govern the country. Not knowing stuff or having the right beliefs, but being able to govern, do the job. A lot of you are smart. A lot of you know stuff. Can you host a show? Can you do that? Can you do the job? My job is not to be smart and know stuff. It's to host the show. It's helpful if I'm smart and I know stuff, but if it's boring, you don't care what I know, no one's tuning in. I'm talking about actually running the biggest corporation in the history of the world, the United States government. Can they run the country? Can they do it? So to me, it only makes sense then. Since the answer is no, well, let me go get people that have done this before and been successful. And also hate all the same people that I hate. May not work. It may not. But it's going to be damn fascinating to watch. This is like the movie Dave. I mean, Trump has basically just called in a room of Charles Grodin's. All right, come on, this is just BS. Dude, Elon Musk is talking about cutting trillions is what he said yesterday, cutting trillions of dollars from the budget. When was the last time you heard a Republican running for national office saying that? Any of our ideologues? Except for a few people, the Rand Pauls, the Chip, notice it's the same names over and over and over again. You know why it's the same names? They're the only names, guys. The bluff's been called. We missed our window. We're not real. We're not a movement. We never were. We're Cherry Girl. And that's why we got routed. And that's why they're firing at him and his people and not shooting at us and our churches. So it's very clear this is where the American fight is. We passed on the fight. Some people are still passing on it. But I don't blame him for this at all. In fact, I think it's a brilliant move. Knowing going in, there are going to be things they suggest that my ideology is going to bristle at. Do you know what? Maybe my ideology will be wrong. I just don't know, where would we have him staff the federal government? Who would we turn him over to? I mean, I couldn't even say, hey, just hire Daniel Horowitz and do what he says. Dude, he's trying to build a movement in state legislatures right now. You know why? Because we don't have a movement. That's why. We have an industry, not a movement. Well, a lot of us wish we had more of a parallel economy than we do, but thankfully one place where we do have one fully available to us is with our mobile phones. So make the switch today to our friends over at Patriot Mobile. And when we have been telling you for years that they take the profits that you give them and reinvest them back in the defense of your values and American exceptionalism, I can tell you I saw it firsthand myself this year. Spoke at one event in Pigeon Forge, Tennessee, and that was for Nefarious and the conference hall we were in, sponsored by Patriot Mobile. Going to talk to my buddy Bob Vander Plaats here in a minute, his leadership summit. The segment that I spoke at here in Des Moines, brought to you by Patriot Mobile. So, I mean, I've seen it with my own eyes. They absolutely do reinvest back in our values. Not to mention they have a great product. It's who our family uses for mobile phone service. They have a fantastic U.S.-based customer service team, which means you can understand them, actually, when you call. You can switch to any of their networks within their Meta network anytime you want. And then also, you'll get a free month of service to get you started if you make the switch today at patriotmobile.com/Steve. Use the offer code Steve to get that free month of service to get you started at patriotmobile.com/Steve. Offer code Steve. patriotmobile.com/Steve. Offer code Steve. Speaking of him, let's welcome in our good buddy Bob Vander Plaats from the Family Leader. Good to see you, my friend. How are you?
I'm doing really well. By the way, Patriot Mobile, that Glenn Story, who owns that, the operator of that, just a great guy. He's one of us. So I echo what Steve just said about Patriot Mobile.
Well, thank you for the backup, man. I appreciate it. You gave me a couple of topics you wanted to discuss this week. I actually want to work back to front on the list you gave me.
Okay.
Okay.
Love to do that.
I want to start with what you think ought to be the right pastoral approach to this election this coming Sunday, the final Sunday before the election, although let's face it, probably 30-40% of the electorate's going to have already voted by the time we get to a week from Tuesday. But nevertheless, it is still a big day. So what do you think is the proper route message that pastors ought to take this Sunday around the country?
Well, I think pastors ought to teach their congregation. They ought to lead their congregation. As a matter of fact, the reason we want to see pastors be engaged, particularly this Sunday, we'd like to see them be engaged, 8 weeks ago, and be progressively moving them to
small p.
Yeah,
small p progressive. Yes, go ahead.
Small p progressive in regards to moving their congregation to vote. But particularly this Sunday, we're trying to, right now, Steve, it's reported that 41 million Christians are saying that they're not going to be voting on this election. And now some of them I'm going, well, thank God they're not voting on this election, right? But there's a lot of others that you're saying, guys, it's time to be a timeless and prophetic voice to a culture. I think it's time for the pastor to talk about government, and it's God's institution. And government is really under the kingdom of Jesus Christ in regards to what is truth and how do we approach this. We raise up ministers of God. Now, they're going to be failed because we're all flawed, but there's some that are going to advance more righteous and just policies and some that are not going to advance righteous and just policies. And we as a church, we as a body, we need to be that timeless and prophetic voice to a culture. For the churches in our network, and I think I've told your audience this before, but you need to believe in the Word of God to be true from Genesis 1 all the way through Revelation. And you don't add a word or subtract a word from it, but in the inerrancy of Scripture, and that Jesus is the way, not a way. When those people in those churches are mobilized to the voting booth, it has an exponential impact. So I believe it's an opportunity for the pastors to really teach their congregation why they would want to be involved and why biblically it's their responsibility to be involved. Matter of fact, we tie it back to, I just wrote an op-ed about the parable of the talents. When God gives you something, you're supposed to bury it or you're supposed to use it. And for some reason in this country, above my pay grade, the citizens of this country, we get to elect our leaders. So we know the people who aren't part of the Bible-believing, gospel-teaching church are going to show up. So let's have the Bible-believing, gospel-teaching church show up and let's weigh in our deal. I would want them to make the congregation feel like it's negligent and it's irresponsible not to show up at that voting booth or have your vote be cast on this election.
I'm trying to find it in my feed. There is a quote from Pastor Jack Hibbs that I cited after the last time we had you on Monday. And dang it, I cannot find it in my feed here. But essentially, Jack says that he cannot think of anything that does more damage to the Church of Jesus Christ in America than being seen as disengaged and lukewarm in the sight of actual evil. Basically saying, not our fight, not our duty, not what we do here. And what is the point of attending a supernatural institution that doesn't behave as if it's a supernatural institution? How would you respond to that?
Well, the way I look at it is that, first of all, he's right. In the book of Revelation, it says either be hot or cold, be worth something, but do not be lukewarm. When you're lukewarm, I just want to spit you out of my mouth. When you're seeing what's taking place...
Here's the quote. I found it. Pardon me.
Go ahead.
There is nothing worse for the witness of the church in America than a saltless, lightless, lukewarm Christian. Jack Hibbs.
And that's exactly where I was going to go. We are called to be salt and light. And so if the light stays home, then you just let the darkness rule. But the light needs to come in and shed light on this stuff. Why marriage between one man and one woman matters. Why you don't allow males to compete in girls' sports. Why you don't allow a government to transition your kids, to mutilate your kids, and call that a good and healthy thing for society. You need to be light to the culture, and you do that by raising up ministers of God who understand who they are and whom they serve, and the blessing of that is going to be to the American citizens. The saltiness is to preserve. Preserve what is good, to slow the decay. And so the church needs to show up. So I agree with Jack. Do not be lukewarm, and it's our call to be salt and light. Scripture is very clear about this. And one of the ways we do this is by doing it at the voting box, but then staying engaged. And that's why I tune into shows like yours, Steve, with Todd and Aaron. Be culturally relevant. Stay engaged so that you can be salt and light in an effective way. And maybe you're going to be called to run for office one day. Maybe you're called to give to somebody running for office or to support somebody running for office. Or maybe you're just there to show up at a rally. But be engaged. Let the Church of Jesus Christ be seen.
I was just talking before you came on. Looking at the Rogan interview and the command of details on issues Trump had reminded me of the conversations him and I had ongoing at different points over 2 years. Because I'm an ideologue.
You bet.
And I mean, the level of accessibility, I would say, that he has provided people of his personality in these long form podcasts reminded me a lot of the conversations him and I had for 2 years. And why? Prior to that, the day of your event in 2015, I was this close to signing on the line. Okay. Until he went out there in that interview and said those unfortunate things that day. And frankly, I have not seen a lot of that Trump for the last 7 or 8 years, which is why I've gone from nearly taking a job to trying to stop him at the convention, to not voting for him, to voting for him, and then thinking like I was working harder to get him elected than he was, to voting for him again, to opposing him in the primaries, because I've not seen the things that initially attracted me to him as a possible alternative outcome to the Republican Party mainstream conservative system. I have always hated as long as you've known me.
You bet.
And whether I was an afternoon host on a local show in Des Moines or what I do now on one of the biggest platforms in the country, I have detested that system since I got into this business. I have on purpose challenged that system head on, which is why I don't have some of the same friends that you do.
Sure.
Okay. Because my name is known in places, not because it's not. Okay. So I see my concern now is that this war is going to happen now without us. I mean, that rally that took place this weekend, that interview, and then that rally that took place yesterday, the cross section of people that showed up there From Tucker Carlson to Dr. Phil was grilling Matt Walsh about tranny surgeries 2 years ago. Now he's out there, vote for Trump, and the tranny stuff's insane. Okay, I mean, this war that we have been, those of us that are ideologues, particularly the biblical worldview, have been trying to move the Republican Party into for a generation now, or at least since Reagan left the stage. This war is happening right now. My fear as a believer is what will happen to the church in America if it is seen as if the war goes down and we are not participating in it. And that other avenues are seen as the primary conduit of how to engage the battle of good and evil and not the church. Do you see where I'm going with this?
I definitely
we self-limited ourselves in pursuit of Rick Warren and Bill Hybels' ecclesiology for the last few decades. And now we're just going to become suburban monks and just, I understand not wanting to support a bunch of milquetoast, lukewarm Republicans. I haven't. And they're not fighting the war that necessarily the way I would fight it, but they are fighting the war. They are Donald Trump is taking shots that, frankly, the pastors you're trying to mobilize, they should be taking those shots instead. And I am concerned if we are replaced by former OnlyFans stars who at least have some common sense, and if we are replaced by Tulsi Gabbard who at least has some common sense. You know what I'm trying to say?
Oh, sure.
I mean, you want to just completely put us in the intellectual ghetto with a biblical worldview. Have the war and just have us say, like Bartleby the Scrivener, I'd prefer not to. I got other things to do. And I am greatly concerned about that.
Well, let's go back to the conversation we just had about being salt and light. The reason you want to be salt and light is Dr. Phil. He's Exhibit A. He was grilling Matt Walsh before about transition. I mean, what are you doing taking all, or you're just trans crazy, dude.
Yes.
Now he's at a Trump rally.
He was asking Matt Walsh 3 years ago if he's transphobic.
But that means somebody was salt and light to Dr. Phil. And now Dr. Phil has changed. And their reason about, you look at, why we try to raise up ministers of God, look at the platform that they have. I go to a large church in West Des Moines that may have 2,000 people on a Sunday morning attend. Donald Trump, look at the platform this guy has. Mm-hmm. You need to be salt and light to him. So if he's willing to take on this war, but then you got to have his back here as well. And then he should be looking to you for guidance as well. So I think the church, if they are true to the gospel, true to biblical teaching, being culturally relevant, equipping their congregation, and I think you're seeing a rise up. Matter of fact, what I saw, Steve, with the Rogan interview, and you kind of took the words right out of my mouth, if you're Meatloaf, these were the conversations I had with Trump. Very accessible. Matter of fact, the Trump that you see at rallies is not the same Trump you see in his office.
And I was very flummoxed by that for several years, in fact.
Yeah. Matter of fact, the last time I was in Trump's office, he took notes on sticky pads of what I was saying and kept placing them to show that I'm going to remember these things. It was a 45-minute conversation. What he is showing, though, to the American people through a Rogan interview like that is, one, I'm way more deeper on these issues than you guys think I am. Two is I'm accessible where Kamala is not accessible at all. And then he pulls off a rally that Billy Joel has got to blush at. Like, my goodness, Madison Square Garden, and that place is not just packed. There's thousands of people outside.
Tens of thousands of people doing spillover to local bars and establishments to see if they can watch it on TV. Who just want to watch it
about what's going on inside. Yeah. There is something.
By the way, this is not holding a rally in the rural South. This is New York City. I don't know how many of you have been there. Not an easy place to casually just get in and out of, okay?
And I think it's great that he goes back to his hometown where they have shunned him like crazy to basically spike it in the end zone and say, look at this, I'm the biggest game in town right now.
It is not pharisaical to have to reluctantly vote for Trump, to have problems with Trump given his behavior in his personal life and his public life and his decision making at times, to want to push him to be more to the right or anything of that nature. To me, though, it is pharisaical to watch him take bullets that on our behalf. All right, to watch him sit up there at Madison Square Garden yesterday and say, "We got to get the hell out of this trans stuff, the hell out of the country."
You bet.
And then to sit back and say, "Well, I think it could be just done better," and he didn't join me.
Yeah,
to me, that's what's pharisaical.
It is. And the thing, Steve, I think when I take a look at the Rogan interview and then you cap it off with a Madison Square Garden rally, as a coach, Todd knows this. All three of you know this. You want to get momentum at the right time. He has got momentum. Matter of fact, I got asked this morning on the way in, what do you think about the race? I said, I think Trump will go north of 300. I think he's going to win. I think he's going to win big. And because Kamala and her manufactured Beyonce show, just so I can get a big attendance, and then Beyonce doesn't even sing. They weren't there for Kamala. They were there for Beyonce. If she's trying to, what do I do with Joe Biden? Do I take him up on stage? Do I lean back? Do I distance myself? Do I come up close to him? Kamala, I think you're seeing a collapse at hand. I think Trump, you're seeing a rise in the momentum on hand. And that's why, Steve, I believe with Trump, I was wrong twice and I was right twice. Wrong twice meaning we need to have somebody other than Trump be the nominee in order to win. In 2016, he beats Hillary Clinton. Then in 2024, what he's doing now to Kamala Harris, and where I was right twice, is I believe for some reason, God has got his hand of favor on this guy and his leadership for 2016 at that time to expose a lot of people. And as you said, Steve, now he's exposing us. But now he's got his hand of favor on 2024 as well. I think he wins. I think he wins big a week from tomorrow night.
I just want to reiterate one more time in the final minute we have. I think it is a terrible idea for an existential battle for the vision and moral direction of the country to take place and to have large swaths of the church tap out and just say, we're busy here. I think there are generational consequences for that if we do that.
The good news, though, Steve, is God has always worked with a remnant, and there is a remnant of churches that are being faithful, that they are being salt and light, and I hope that remnant also extends to a Donald Trump. I know that you've got voice, I've got voice into that. But be salt and light and make sure that you're playing for an audience of one, and that's the King of Kings.
You want to lose the next generation of young men to the alt-right, to Bronze Age paganism, to red pilling,
without question.
And who is the pornographer brothers in Romania? I can't even remember the Tates, right? You want to lose the next generation of young men to crap like that? Just decide we're too nice and have too many things, and really, we're so principled we can't even fight for our principles. Yep. Don't be accounted for when there's actually a war happening, and don't be surprised when your next generation of young men decide, well, I'm going to go with the people who actually showed up.
Well, Steve, wasn't it Luther who said, you can call yourself a warrior for Christ, but if you shrink back from the biggest battle at that time, you are no warrior at all. Yep. And right now, this is the biggest battle of our time.
Not who I would have chosen to fight it with, not with the way I would, and we're not doing it the way I would choose to do it, but it's pretty obvious this is where the fight is happening, so I'm going to run to where the fight is at.
Amen. Good stuff.
Hour 2 is next. Stay tuned. All right, back here on Blaze Media, otherwise known as Blaze TV, radio, and podcast. I'm Steve Deace with Todd Erzin and Aaron McIntyre. Let us know what you think about what we think via the stevedeace.com inbox. You can do so by emailing us, steve@stevedeace.com. That's DEACE. Like us on Facebook, MeWe, and Gab. You can follow us at Steve Deace Show on X or Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. Please don't forget to subscribe to our new YouTube channel. Still blows my mind. We are getting just as many views for videos there with 10% of the subscriber base that we had built up on our old YouTube page. That just goes to show you what big tech censorship can do to you. So thank you guys for making that happen. Please keep subscribing to the new YouTube channel at Deace Show on YouTube. Again, that is at Deace Show on YouTube. And if you listen to the podcast version, thank you. Please leave us a 5-star review. Hit subscribe or follow if you're on iTunes, and those things help the show as well. And we'll also assure that every time we do a new episode, it's right there in your podcast feed each and every single time. And this part of the show brought to you by our friends over at realestateagentsitrust.com. And as you try to navigate one of the more challenging real estate markets in American history, you also need to make sure you've got an agent that is there for you. every single step of the way, all the way to that final step of victory. And we're going to help you find that agent where the name says it all. realestateagentsitrust.com. A lot of times those agents in our database that we refer you to that we have not put in the database, if we haven't vetted them, if we haven't verified their track record of success, well, a lot of times they come from right here in this very audience. So you have a value system in common as well. So go to the website, especially in these unprecedented times.
I don't have enough Bings anymore.
Yeah, are we out of dings? We are. Go to realestateagentsitrust.com. Again, that is realestateagentsitrust.com. All right, now I want us to discuss what I think is paradigm shifting news, gentlemen. And I think we all anticipated it would be some form of a paradigm shifter no matter what occurred, no matter what happened. Just because we are taking the man who is seen as the face of the resistance to the socio-political media industrial complex, swamp, deep state, whatever you want to call it, all right, and marrying it now to the largest alternative platform outside of the scope of that same complex. So I want to start there. I think there will be attempts that will be made to emulate what was done here moving forward. Like we're already talking about Kamala going on Shannon Sharp's podcast, for example. This will be the model moving forward, just as the Nixon-Kennedy television debate was the model moving forward. But you'd be hard-pressed to find a debate, probably until Joe Biden's senility meltdown, any presidential debate that even approached the level of consequence that first Kennedy-Nixon television era debate had, right?
Of course.
And I think the same will be true here. I don't think anything will come after it. I think it's the most consequential presidential candidate interview of my lifetime, both anything that occurred beforehand and then anything that will occur afterwards.
And it's interesting. It reverses what you talked Nixon-Kennedy. The thing about that is people who listened to the debate on the radio thought that Nixon won. People who watched it with the opposite thought the opposite.
Yep.
This reverses that paradigm somewhat, in that all of this, the way Trump, Nazis, how that worked over time, how it was framed. Now Donald Trump is there for 3 hours, and it just makes it impossible to come away with, you don't love him, maybe not, but it's like, that's not Hitler. And
that's why they call it the Joe Rogan experience. You're going to know somebody after talking to him for 3 hours. Yes. 6 things about this that I think make this the paradigm shifter moving forward. Number 1, Rogan has arguably the largest reach of any singular show since Oprah Winfrey. Now, he does not have the reach Oprah Winfrey had. That's no knock against him. It's impossible. Media and information has been democratized via the technology in ways that it wasn't in the mid-90s to the early 2000s when Oprah was at her apex, okay? And there were still only even a handful of outlets and platforms available that could reach an order of magnitude that she could with a show like hers. Now there's a lot more of them. But for the democratized era of media we have now, Rogan has the largest show anyone's had since Oprah. And you have to also look at who his core audience is. Largely comprised of men who view themselves as some form of truth seeker, but also very distrusting of the existing political informational paradigm. I had a smart guy ask me over the weekend, well, Rogan's audience is really just a bunch of white guys. Isn't that Trump's base too? They might be white, but that's an oversimplification. I would bet, my next quarterly bonus from the Blaze, I'd bet that Rogan's audience, if polled prior to this election, they would have had 2 chances to vote for Obama and 2 chances to vote for Trump. And I'd be very confident in betting my next quarterly bonus from the Blaze, those guys have overwhelmingly voted for Obama more times than Trump. Now this time, the third time may be the charm, but I'm talking the before this cycle, I'd be willing to bet that. In fact, Rogan until recently mocked the stolen election narrative. I'd also be willing to bet that Joe Rogan has never voted for Trump and voted for Obama twice. I'd be willing to bet that too. For better or for worse, There is more discipling of the next generation of male headship in America via the Joe Rogan show than there is than systemically has taken place in the Christian church. That's number one. Number two, Trump is arguably now the most famous living person in all of human history. He is living now. Christ is living and reigning, but when he lived here as a person, the technology that it would existed just didn't exist then as exists today. You would be hard-pressed to find a person that as they were living their natural life is more famous than Donald Trump is now. And yet, as you mentioned a minute ago, Todd, the largest platform in the country still granted Donald Trump an opportunity to counter so many misconceptions about himself, about his movement that he represents, about his beliefs, and frankly, misconceptions that Trump on his own, even as masterful at branding as he is, has had difficulty breaking through to counter on his own. And this platform provided him the means to do that. This interview alone is not going to erase nearly a decade of media malpractice and malfeasance, but I'm going to use this analogy. D-Day is considered the most consequential event in World War II. It took place on June 6, 1944. Hitler would not take his own life for another 10 months. Japan would not surrender for another full calendar year. Longer than that, actually. We dropped the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August of 1945. So even though that is considered the most consequential event of World War II, it did not end the war. It forever shifted the momentum in the paradigm, right? But it didn't end the war. I think it is very possible that October 25th, 2024, years from now, could be looked at as the pivotal moment that shifted the momentum in the information war. Did you guys see over the weekend after this interview, many of the Silicon Valley techno giants called Donald Trump over the weekend? The Washington Post didn't just refuse to nominate or to endorse Kamala. Jeff Bezos is now demanding that they hire some conservatives. Number three, I think the beneficial impact of this interview to candidate Trump would end to equate this from a media buy, it'd be the most expensive media buy of all time. And then that counts on the fact that you can conjure up in the 30 to 60 seconds your media buy would have available to you the message or series of messages that would capture the imagination. So it would not just be the most expensive media buy of all time. It would have to be the best and most expensive. I mean, when you look at the numbers of who has watched this just in the first day, and we're not even counting, as Aaron pointed out, audio downloads. We're not even counting the viral clips going everywhere all over the country. It's incalculable. Keep this in mind. Donald Trump's previous two runs as for president of the United States were decided by a combined less than 130,000 votes in the decisive swing states. Those two races combined, not just even one of those elections being decided by that would be insane. They both were combined. Combine those two elections in 16 and 20, a little less than 80,000 votes. In 2016, a little more than 40,000 votes in 2020 in those exact same swing states determine the outcome of those elections. You could not put a price tag. And that's even if you could find the people who could create the perfect message to take advantage of the moment, you couldn't put a price tag on a media buy like this. Number four. We've talked on this show for years about the fact we're an epistemological nuclear winner in the West. And again, epistemology is just a nice fancy stained glass window word for the study of knowledge, the study of truth, the study of how do we know what we know, and how do we know it's true. More epistemological damage was done to the spirit of the age in this interview than what the combined efforts of the weak, anemic, and effeminate Christian church that created Western civilization in the first place has even systemically attempted for decades. Let me give you just one example. And by the way, this is coming from two dudes who have some very confused and funky beliefs by a biblical worldview standard. I mean, Joe basically believes in the chariots of the gods, and Trump believes you can morally earn your way to heaven. Neither one of those ideas is biblical. But just two dudes, just interested in knowing what is true. I'll get to the greatest example of this in a minute, but it dawned on me watching this. I can see why during the scamdemic, the spirit of the age tried to assassinate Rogan's platform. And during this campaign has tried to literally assassinate Donald Trump to avoid a moment like this. Because the church is largely vacated from the public square. It used to be, hey, you want to get in a fight? You want moral clarity? You want to know what is really true? You had to go through the church to find that out in America for the first 2 centuries of the country. The church doesn't want that job anymore. Wants to build megapolises in the suburbs, a bunch of quiet Idahos, and just rediscover monasticism. But in the suburbs, we can still get pizza delivered for the youth group, instead of remote areas and castles.
I wish that was even a remote.
It's not even a joke. Not even a line.
Yeah, I know.
And no one wants to wear those silly bull haircuts anymore and the stupid gray robes. That's it. All right. I want to wear nice clothes. I want product in my hair. I want to get a pizza delivered, and the monastery. That's what I want. Especially if I can have a big screen TV. So you can see these two guys holding this conversation. Just what's real, man? What's true? What's not? Going back and forth. That's dangerous. Because since the church is abrogated from the public square, now what happened is government took its place. And so you had to go through government to find out what's true, what's moral, to activate within and to engage and plug in on those things. What Rogan and Trump provided was an alternative to that. And this goes back to the conversation I had with Vander Plaats last hour. I'm very, very concerned. As a guy whose entire show is prime directive is the biblical worldview, who I have laid my soul bare doing this show from the very beginning. My sins, my mistakes, my almost failures, my current ones. Okay, I've shared my testimony. You guys, if you've listened to this show for years, you have walked through a sanctification process with me. I can't be any more open than I am. Because I've lived what the power of the gospel does and is still doing in my life. And I want to share that with everyone within the sound of my voice. I am deeply concerned. And the Rogan-Trump interview just is another example of it. We're going to have the battle now. We're going to have the war. The stuff Francis Schaeffer wrote about 40 years ago, Chuck Colson wrote about 20 years ago. We're doing it now. We're doing it right now. The great pushback against and the people I'm talking about, Trump and Rogan, smart people, but they don't have that level of spiritual discernment. They don't even know necessarily where the ideologies they're pushing back on even come from or really about. They're just truth-seeking dudes, man. Common sense-seeking dudes. And I am deeply concerned that we're going to be so cool for school that now the war will just happen without us. Even though it's our war. It's our war. It's why we're here. It's why there's the church. It's why it exists outside of time and space. It's the only transcendent institution God ever gave humanity. It's why we're here. And I think that will have devastating consequences for this culture, because it'll have devastating consequences for the church moving forward if we abrogate again. If we just decide, instead of Rick Warren and Bill Hybels, Christianity Never and Matt Chandler now are the new popes, we won't recover in this culture from that. We'll have relegated ourselves to the ghettos of American thought. And it will be deserved. Now, the greatest example of the conversation that took place I'm describing just happened organically on an issue that just kind of happened to come up. Like when we were all thinking about the issues we were hoping we were going to get discussed, this was not necessarily one of them on the tip of any of our tongues. They started talking about environmentalism. And Trump displayed an impressive command of that issue. And during the course of this conversation, did more damage to a key cog of the left's religion that he probably doesn't even understand. And you couldn't really understand. If you're not a spirit-filled believer, you can't truly understand it. You can feel it, but you can't truly discern it. But he just completely deconstructed, especially given who that audience is. I promise you, they had not heard many of the things Trump said in that interview about the environmental movement. And he just destroyed it. And frankly, in ways ideologically, the last few years, I did not think he was capable of. This was a form of cultural evangelism, is what this was. This is, again, stuff the church used to do. John of Damascus was a Christian leader in Syria in the 7th century at the time of the rise of Islam. And he saw Islam taking over Antioch and Damascus, the original enclaves of Christianity that he came from. The place, where Paul's on the road and encounters the Lord himself, and Islam is taken over. And he stood up and he opposed the sheiks and he opposed the imams and debated them and deconstructed their false religion right to their face. The aforementioned Francis Schaeffer did this to the counterculture in the 70s, coming out of the 60s. That's what happened in this conversation to the environmental movement. They destroyed it. They destroyed it. Not seen anything like it at CPAC or that movement we supposedly have that I just don't see a lot of. If Trump and Rogan are able to repackage common sense and have it transcend the mostly fake partisan divide, that is a far more existential threat to the darkness than the collective state of the church, sadly. And if you consider the contrast of this conversation, by the way, happening amid of people bragging on X over the weekend, I'm canceling my LA Times and Washington Post subscription because you didn't endorse the candidate that I wanted. You didn't endorse anybody, which tells you really they don't want news. They want a propaganda narrative affirmed. That is very striking. Here's the thing. That's really what the church is supposed to be doing. But Joe Rogan, in between F-bombs, and Donald Trump, in between arts of the deal, they did it. That's our job. They did it instead. And so that's why they're trying to stop Joe Rogan's podcast and not your pastor's podcast. And that's why they're trying to shoot Donald Trump and not your pastor. Because they're doing our jobs. That's why. Finally, I think a marker was laid down here of where the culture war will likely head post-Trump, with the church currently transing itself and thus self-castrated. Something must inevitably emerge to challenge the darkness. It's inevitable. Now, do I think God would prefer to use our family values pastors and who are way less profane? Of course. Unfortunately, Gideon blew the trumpet. And many of our family values pastors who are not profane could not be bothered. They couldn't be bothered to show. So men like Trump and Rogan it is then, I guess. Now, that doesn't mean as believers we compromise our core principles. Because we are not permitted to do these things. We're not. But it does mean I think we have to recognize where the battle is raging. And I think you go there and you fight alongside those who are willing to wage it with us. And at times you have to tell them no. I worked for Donald Trump. If I did, he said, hey, I need you to go out there and tell the Christians to not be pro-life anymore. I'd say, listen, sir, I appreciate you overturning Roe v. Wade and the fact you're taking a bullet for people like me. I can't do that. Because as much as I love and admire you for doing those things for me, my Lord comes first. Ask anything of me that doesn't pit you against my Lord, and my answer will be yes. But you just need to know. Pit me against my Lord, and my answer is going to always be no. That chain of command must always exist. But short of that, I'll give you everything I got. Not everyone on those boats, back to the D-Day analogy, not everyone on those boats was a Spirit-filled believer, folks. So, once again, and I'm going to keep harping on this, it is time to cast aside the sweater vests, the furrowed brows, and get in the fight. If you think the church is marginalized now, have this fight go on and have us not participate. It'll be good for neither us and therefore the culture. There is a lot more about this interview I could say, but I'll pause there. So Todd and Aaron, you can give your thoughts.
Well, Donald Trump in one of those clips, when he kind of meanders. I don't know why I've always gotten so much attention. It always has just kind of come to me. And there's clearly a lot of ego with Donald Trump, a lot of striving for attention. But the way he said it is like, even I'm surprised by a lot of this. And Joe Rogan jumps in and says, well, I know, because you said a lot of crazy bleeping stuff. And it seemed, whatever it was, it also seemed authentic. And people were sick of the inauthentic. That's where, no matter what your politics are in every single age, all of politics ultimately is populist on some level because of that. You can be a pure ideologue all you want to. If you can't relate, sooner or later, over time, it's going to be irrelevant, because this isn't just a debate contest. It's not just a report card. It got so much to the point, my point in how it became irrelevant is the actual Republican national platform. Steve, how many years ago was it on your old show when Stu, what's-his-face, the Republican leader in Iowa, said he hadn't even read it. He was leading the Republicans.
15 years ago is when that was, yeah.
15 years ago. This has been going on for a long time. And this is a very Christian principle. Our faith is incarnate. Yes, it is great ideas ruminated over time, great truths, but it is all enfleshed in a God-man named Jesus Christ. The same as all of our ideas, even if they're the most right ideas they've ever been, they need to be enfleshed. They need to relate to real people. And that's what's happening right now. There is a resorting of that, and Steve put it really perfect. You can resist this truth all you want to. This chance has been had by the right for Steve and my entire adult political lifetime. And we have blown it. There's no denying that. And that's the real point about, and to the degree, part two of this, and the other really important point, and it has to do with Steve's monologue about personnel. That's as close as you're going to get to an apology. Donald Trump just meaning, I didn't know how to govern. I trusted the experts on some level. I didn't think anything would be so demonic as to take me down just because I was Donald Trump. Well, that happened. It appears he's not going to make that mistake happen again. So on two fronts, we seem to understand the nature of how we have to make our ideas incarnate, and we have to understand how that happens with real people. We can wish all we want to, have that great football game plan going in. We're dealing with real people on our end and on their end. What are we prepared to do?
You know, I listened to the first half of this interview on Friday night. I'll just be honest, I got kind of bored and distracted, so I turned it off, and then I listened to the rest of it on Saturday night. And I was thinking to myself, as far as the actual substance of the conversation goes, you know, this is just like a 3-hour conversation if you were sitting around. I likened it actually to when I was growing up, and I'd sit at the dinner table for a family gathering, and my uncle and my dad and maybe some of my older siblings, they would all sit around for a long time and just have a conversation, and it just kind of went different places. Some of it was engaging, stimulating, and I would really concentrate and listen to what was being said there. And some of it was less so, and you'd kind of tune out just a little bit. And I got to the end of the conversation, and I think this is probably where I think this is probably a bias or just kind of I've gotten used to the Overton window being so expanded in the digital age. Like I listen to very little cable news. I listen to the very little legacy news. I've gotten so numb to the expansion of the Overton window thanks to platforms like X, thanks to podcasts like this one, platforms like The Blaze, sometimes podcasts like Joe Rogan. I didn't really see it for what it was. And that is, you just sit back, take a step back, and realize that the former host of Fear Factor, the former host of The Apprentice, just had an Overton window shattering conversation in the year 2024 that might be the most actually, and the numbers bear it out so far, important conversation, not an interview, conversation in at least modern American politics. And you say to yourself, whoa, that giant sucking sound that you hear is the vacuum of the mainstream establishment media being punctured by what you just heard.
And I am here for it.
Because in a vacuum, you can hold up any individual, Donald Trump, Ronald Trump, pick any individual. You can hold that person up in a vacuum and say, literally Hitler. And because that's the only thing, it's a vacuum. The normie, anybody can just say, well, yeah, I guess I could see that. You listen to just a conversation, just a normal conversation that goes 3 hours, and you're like, no, I can't see it. I don't agree with him.
I think he'd be a good president, but he ain't Hitler.
He ain't Hitler. That giant sucking sound you hear is an absolute scissor to the Overton window. And I just want to end by saying this as well, along the lines of what you got in there. Open war is upon you whether you would risk it or not, folks. It is. I've made this analogy before, and I want to make it one more time. On a computer desktop, you can create a shortcut to any program on that computer. Any program. The shortcut is not the program itself. It's just a quick way of getting through layers and layers and layers of folders and files and folders and files to get to the program that you want to open up. You can customize that shortcut all you want. You can put the icon that you want. The icon might not even be indicative of what the program is all about, but still shortcut to that program. Whether you want it or not, and this is something that I've had to come to grips with personally, on a personal level. You think my personality, you're around me every single day. My personality jives with Donald Trump, not so much. But whether or not I want it, whether or not you want it, he is the left's shortcut to people like you and me. That bullet was meant for us, whether we want to acknowledge that or not. And there's a lot of people I see, along the lines of what Steve was saying, that don't want to acknowledge that. You're Cornelius Fudge. You don't want to admit that he's back, Voldemort.
Amen. Well, our friends at Hillsdale College want to distribute 1 million of the ultimate voter guides here between now and the election. It's called the Pocket U.S. Constitution. If you want to get your free Pocket U.S. Constitution, or you want to get a free one that you can give to somebody else, just go to daceforhillsdale.com. F-O-R, daceforhillsdale.com. Go there right now. Complete a simple form. They'll put it in the mail for you with free shipping. Again, this offer expires soon, and it is the ultimate voter guide. So get your Pocket Constitution today, because every American should be familiar with our nation's founding principles of liberty, and how better to become so than reading America's founding documents like the U.S. Constitution. So get your free Pocket Constitution, easy for me to say, your free Pocket Constitution today at daceforhillsdale.com. That's daceforhillsdale.com. Well, I'm sure a lot of you will remember a year ago, last Christmas, there was a lot of controversy in our Iowa legislature. A Baphomet statue, or an altar to Satan, was set up by basically, trolls, Satanists, pagans, attempting to make a statement about religious freedom. And so such an altar was erected in our state capital here in Iowa during Christmas time. And this became a national story and a lot of disgust about, is this really what religious freedom means? Finally, one man said, hell no, literally, and went in there on an afternoon and tore the altar down and then turned himself in. His name is Michael Cassidy, and we interviewed him at the time, along with his attorney, and got an update, and then kind of thought that his case had been, dealt with, and we're just going to move on. But now that may not necessarily be the case, and we've welcomed Michael here back to the show. Brother, how are you?
Hey, Steve, doing well, thank you.
So do I have those details about what happened last December in general? Do I have those correct? And is there anything that needs to be added or subtracted in any way?
No, that summed it up pretty good.
And then remind us who you are. Who's Michael Cassidy?
I'm just a guy living in Mississippi. I've been in the Navy Reserve for a few years, was active duty Navy for a while, flew F-18s, and then flew another kind of jet as an instructor pilot. And then I saw what was going on up in Iowa. I couldn't believe it. And I flew up and took care of the demon statue. And as you said, turned myself in, and then have been dealing with the legal system and the Navy ever since.
So it looked like from a legal standpoint, this thing has largely been resolved, correct? And can you remind us of what that resolution turned out to be on just the civil legal side?
Sure. So it was originally charged as criminal mischief, which is vandalism, which, of course, I admitted to doing when I turned myself in. The DA for Polk County, she's, a leftist funded by George Soros, and she thought it fit to increase that misdemeanor charge to a felony hate crime charge. It took a few months, but the prosecutors, as the trial date started getting closer, they knew that they had nothing, no valid basis for that. And so they dropped the felony charge, dropped the hate crime charge. And so we had what's called a deferred judgment for a misdemeanor vandalism charge. So I paid a small fine. I've got a little bit of probation, and then it's going to get expunged from my record relatively soon. So nothing permanent on my record with Iowa.
So it looked like this story was done, but now your branch of the military has decided to step in here and try to squeeze and press on you a little bit. So what's going on with the Navy?
So it's interesting, Steve, that a leftist-funded district attorney in Iowa thought that this was, in the end, of less consequence than the United States Navy. So recently, this month, the Navy decided to charge me as a domestic extremist, using similar language as what the Iowa DA talked about in the felony hate crime charge, that depriving the Satanic Temple of various individual religious freedoms, and so on. And so this is what the United States Navy has decided to charge me with.
I want to go back to when the military was imposing the mandates of the toxic genetic serum known as the COVID-19 vaccine. And I can't tell you how many military members I got to know and or interviewed who risked everything and lost their station, pension, etc. And this wasn't unanimous, but the vast majority of them, Michael, were people of some form of Christian conviction. The vast majority of them were. Mm-hmm. And it led me to the conclusion that this was a purging process. That this was essentially, how far can we push people? Because, as a soldier, and you know this better than I do, I'm not one, but you give up, you sign off a portion of your autonomy and agency to be a soldier. There is some level of basic civil rights that you are acknowledging I will forego in order to assimilate into the collective armed service here, right? But in this case, we're dealing with something that's not FDA approved, and we're actually using the soldiers to experiment on them for the rest of the public, essentially. And a lot of soldiers said that's a bridge too far, especially looking at the epidemiological database here of the DOD and looking at the rise of miscarriages among the women and heart ailments among the men. And I absolutely believe that mandate was to try and purge people of Christian conviction out of the military, because they'd be the first ones that would be the most inclined not to turn arms on their own countrymen if asked to do so. And I think, frankly, that's exactly what is happening to you. We cannot allow any people that are critical thinkers or actually are willing to act on the founding belief system of the country, because the people running the military right now, they don't believe in any of those fundamentals. They don't believe in that foundation. And if your example is allowed to stand, you may encourage other people to act on similar convictions.
First off, I'll say that my views are not representative of the Department of Defense. I just got to throw that disclaimer in there. But I agree with you, Steve. I think that we've seen it for years now, with whether it's with COVID, you've seen with the I think in North Carolina, there's been training that has been training Army people to identify pro-life groups as domestic terrorists. There's a Army an officer in the Idaho National Guard who got relieved of command because he has biblical views of marriage and LGBT that he was doing on his own time. Talking about on his own time, just like what I did in Iowa. I wasn't activated. I was a civilian on a day off. And so, but what the military is doing is a reflection of the beliefs of this administration. And that what's sad is that most people in the military, at least, at my level and below, in general, are more conservative people, are more Christian, are more likely to, vote for Trump. But the higher ups can see, and it kind of trickles down to this level too, they can see the tone that is being set by the administration. And if you are a career-minded person, then you are less likely to stand up for your beliefs. You're more likely to stand up or to not stand up if it's going to affect your ability to have a career in the military. And they can read the tea leaves over the past several years. And that's what is so, really what's at stake in this election in a week, is that if we elect Kamala Harris, we go down the same path that we've been going, which has been a pretty bad path so far, or we elect Trump and hopefully we can get rid of some of the rot, the cultural rot that's in our military, and get things turned around.
I know your attorney. He's been on our show. Smart guy, fellow veteran. Is he helping you here on the naval side as well?
Yes, he is.
What is he telling you? Is your case maybe completely up to who wins this election?
Honestly, I think so. If Trump wins this election, I think this case goes away. We don't even the date that they have for my board, my trial, for lack of a better word. It'll be sometime next year. So if this administration, wins another term, essentially, then almost certainly that board or trial will happen. What ends up happening from that, it's still the same on its face ridiculous charge that that Iowa DA dropped several months ago. So even if it does go to a board, we think we've got a decent chance just with the facts, but it'll be up to I think 3 members of that board and what they think.
Michael, finally, what does it say about the state of the military and its current leadership that we are both acknowledging the outcome of your case based on a fundamental right or liberty is determined not by the Uniform Code of Military Justice or the laws of nature and nature's God, but who's the next commander-in-chief? Who wins the election? What does that say about the current state of the military?
It's not a good thing. It's somewhat unique, I think, in our country's history that the military, for most of my lifetime, has been a pretty politically neutral institution. Certainly, people within it have their political beliefs. People in it will go on to political office. It's not as if we're just this separate entity, completely different from the country, but we should be different. It shouldn't really matter who the commander in chief is in terms of some of just, basic being able to be a Christian or have outspoken Christian beliefs. I think if I had built an altar to the Satanic Temple myself, the Navy wouldn't have cared. But in part of their charging investigation into me, they brought up 4 tweets that I had that just talked about being a Christian. And so as a negative that I'm a Christian, and then as a positive, they pulled straight from the Satanic Temple's website talking about how they promote individualism, they're for disaffected former Christians, and they support abortion. And that's what the Navy is saying is a good thing. And I don't think that's a good thing. And hopefully we have some change here in the next few months.
Any way our audience can help at all, Mike?
Go out and vote. We've got 8 days until the election. So whether it's early voting or voting on next Tuesday, please do that. We do have a Give, Send, Go that's still open for my legal fund. If you can just search my name, Michael Cassidy, to help out there with some of the legal costs. But truly just go out, vote, pray for our country, pray for our leaders, pray for the president, pray for both candidates. Everybody needs prayer.
Thank you, brother. Appreciate you.
Thank you.
You bet. God bless. What do you think?
Man, he's so right about honing in on how much this election means. Back when I got arrested working for the Des Moines Register, listen, I knew the county prosecutor at the time could not stand the Des Moines Register, and so I was just a target no matter what I said or did in my defense. But I felt I was going to get a fair trial, and so I did, and I won. I don't think I'd have that level of confidence today to just leave it in the hands that I did. And that's what he's facing right now. It shouldn't be about an election on this, but it is. And we have to do what we can with this election to turn him back to the way it was.
So when we talk about what are you prepared to do you think Michael wasn't aware of the fact that he was opening himself up to the legal hijinks that he opened himself up to?
Which is why he turned himself in.
That's why he turned himself in. He was prepared to do that. He was prepared. He knew what the ramifications would be. And it was for the sake of just not putting up with an out and out, blatant, explicitly naked attempt from literal Satanists who think, by the way, they're just trolling you. They're not. They really are servants of their master. But for the out and out purposes of just trying to say, where is your God? Michael Cassidy said, here he is. And he said, no. What are you all prepared to do? What are we all prepared to do? That's what Todd is asking when he says that. He asks that question all of the time. And just echoing the concerns that you have brought up, both in the top of the show and the last segment, regardless of whether you wish it or would risk it or not, if you hold to any form of conservatism, whatever the heck that is these days, but certainly if you hold to any view of a biblical worldview, the open war is upon you. It is upon you. You cannot escape that. The belligerents may not be who you would prefer them to be. The battle doesn't look like how you would prefer it to act to be right now. It isn't maybe where you would prefer it to be. But until we're prepared to acknowledge things that maybe flip in our own minds the paradigm that we had imagined in our heads, this thing is going to continue to circle the drain. The battle is here, whether we want it to be or not, whether belligerents are who we want them to be or not. We have to make amends with that. I've had to do that myself. So that's 8 days to go. That's the question, and that's the thing that I'm thinking about the most.
You know, I had forgotten about this story with everything else that's gone on this year with assassinations and trials and everything else. And I'm talking about it again. I am reminded that I am disappointed in myself that I didn't go do it myself. And I did think about it. I think I said this even at the time. I contemplated doing it. And I talked myself out of it because I thought if I went down there and did it, it would be looked at like a stunt and not sincere, as a attempt to create a viral moment for my show, and not something of sincere conviction. And so I use that to talk myself out of it. I'd like to think I was sincere in that concern, but I'm not entirely sure of that. Might have just been to talk myself into my own complacency.
Well, I know, to your point about pastors should be the ones taking shots, there's hundreds and hundreds of pastors in Iowa had that same conversation with themselves and chose wrongly, because it should have been about 100 of them just doing it.
Amen. We are back at it again tomorrow, noon to 2 Eastern, right after Glenn Beck, right here on Blaze TV. Until then, Romans 8:28.